Welcome to DevOps Clinic. My name is Matt, and I've been a Linux system admin, network engineer, and DevOps engineer for over 25 years. I'm also a SaltStack certified engineer. We're continuing on with our Getting Started with Salt Project series. In our last video, we showed you the power of remote task execution with Salt execution modules. And if you haven't watched that video or the first video yet, there'll be links to both in the description below. If at any time you have any questions or comments about these videos, please leave them in the comments below. Our goal is to help you learn new skills as a DevOps engineer or SysAdmin. So if there's a problem you're stuck on, we're here to help. Today, we're going to be learning about configuration management. Before we get started, I want to tell you about our sponsor. Personally, I've been using Linode for over 10 years. I choose them not only because they provide reliable Linux servers, but also they offer services like fast disk storage, an easy-to-use web manager, and data centers in 11 markets. Not to mention they have great uptime. And if you click the link in the description below, not only will you help out our channel, but you'll also receive a $100 credit just for signing up. All right, let's get back to it. All right, what is configuration management? Well, configuration management is a process for maintaining computer systems, servers, networks, and software in a desired consistent state. It's a way to make sure that our systems perform as it's expected to. And if you use other systems, which we'll get into in future episodes like Git, we can keep track of those changes over time. To get started, we can go to docs.saltproject.io, and if we click on documentation, scroll to the bottom where it says Salt Module Reference. And last time we looked at execution modules, this time we're going to keep scrolling to state modules. All right, so if we wanted to look for the file module as an example, it's all in alphabetical order, just like execution modules. And it's going to give us how we can use the file module. Now, one thing to keep in mind is there is a file execution module as well as a file state module, and they both have to do with dealing with files and directories. But because you might have different options when running a remote task, a command that you run at that time and place, as opposed to something where you're maintaining a configuration state, they might have different options. They're also used differently. So remote tasks we run from the command line at the time we run it with all the options we need. States we're going to put into a configuration file. All right, so here's our salt master that we've been using for the past couple episodes. And if we go over to the etc salt folder and we take a look at the master configuration, and we'll look for an option called file_roots. And what this is going to tell us is it's going to tell us where the salt state configuration is going to live. And we can move this, but most people just leave it in the /srv/salt folder. So let's get out of here and go to this folder. And I see there's nothing here, so let's create the salt folder. And now when Salt looks at this folder, the very first thing that we need at the top of this directory structure here is we're going to need what's called a top file. And you only need it in this one location. You don't need it in any subfolders. And what this is going to do is it's going to tell Salt what to do when people query it for configuration. So it's the very top of the configuration structure. And so what we're going to do here, since we are not using specific environments, is we're going to just use base. And this is going to apply to all servers that connect to this Salt master. And just like when we were querying from the command line specific servers, so we could say minion star or minion 1 star, when we were doing the command line execution. For right now, we're just going to use star to say all servers. In a future episode, we'll talk about more advanced top configuration where you can say only servers get specific configurations. But for right now, we're just going to say all servers this applies to. And then to get started, we're just going to create a default configuration. Now, all of these names that we find here in the top file, this is either going to refer to a specific file or a folder. So since we're calling it default, we can do one of two things. In this folder, we can create a default.sls file, and the SLS files are going to be your salt state files. Or another option is to create a directory called default. If we were to create a directory called default, then we would want to create a file inside that folder. And the default file in a folder would be init.sls. For this, we're just going to create a single file. Okay, so let's create our first state. We're going to use the file module, and we're just going to create a very simple file in root's home directory. So let's say in root's home directory, we're going to create a file called world.txt. And this first line with no indentations, this is the state identifier. So it's basically, if we want to refer to it later, there are ways where we can say we require this file to exist or the state to have been applied first. So we can also, if we don't want to use the file name, we could also give it a name. So let's, we could say root home folder world txt as an example. And it's totally up to you how you want to name your files. A lot of people like to just use the names like this. Now the next thing we would want to do is we want to tell it what we want to do with this state. So in this case, we want to call the file module, and we want to manage a file. So if we say managed, so everything that comes after this is going to apply to the root world.txt. So again, we're indenting 2 for every section. And if we didn't define the file name up here, what we would want to do is define the file here. Again, because we've already defined it here, we don't need this line. But if we call this root underscore, world.txt or something like that, then we would want to define what the file we're managing. So we can actually comment this out. But then the next thing we want to do is, what are we going to put in this file? So a very basic way to do this is we could say contents. And what do we want to put in this? Let's put hello world. And let's also set some permissions for this. So let's say the user is owned by root, and the group is also root. And since it's in root's home folder, we can set the file mode to 0600. So it's readable and writable for root, not executable, and nobody else can read, write, or execute it. So this is a pretty simple file, pretty simple state. But how do we get this onto our servers? So let's write and quit. Okay, so if we want to apply this state, there's a number of ways to do it. We can either do it from the salt master, or we can also be on the salt minion. That's something I'll show you in a little bit. Right now, we only want to apply it to minion 1 for our testing. So if we specify minion 1, and in previous episodes, we did things like test ping or file.read, which were the execution modules. There's also the state execution module. And it has a bunch of options, but the one that we are concerned with is state.apply. Now, if we were to just run this, it's going to do what's called applying the high state, which means it's going to go to the top.sls file and see all the different states that apply to minion 1 and run all of them all at the same time. And sometimes that is what you want to do. You want to run the high state to ensure all of your states are applied. Sometimes you only want to apply one state. So you can also add the name of the state that you want to apply after state.apply. So let's run this now. And we can see here it applied the root world.txt ID, and it made sure that the file existed, and it's basically created. So if we were to hop over to the minion, and we're in the root home folder, there is a world.txt file, and we can see the permissions on it is read and write for the user and no other permissions. And we can see the contents is hello world with exclamation marks. Okay, so creating a single file is easy, but we don't always want to have static information in here. Just having contents hello world, that's not always useful. So let's do something a little more advanced. Let's get out of here. And earlier I mentioned that when you're calling states, they could be files or folders. And we're going to actually convert this to a folder structure because it allows us a little more options when it comes to managing stuff, and it'll be a little neater to keep track of. Okay, so let's make a directory called world. And let's move the default configuration into world, and we're going to call it init.sls. We're also going to have to go and update our top file. And we're just going to say the state is called world because it's a subfolder. All right, so we have our init.sls file. But what if we wanted to have it manage a file that was a little more complex? Like say it had the server's name in it. What we could do is let's create a folder in here called files. And let's create a file called world.txt.jinja. And Jinja is a templating language. It's used by Python. And since Salt is written in Python, its default templating language is Jinja. There are others, but this is the most commonly used one. Now, if you remember, when we were doing the execution modules, we talked about grains. And grains, again, are information about the server, about the minion. Things like its host name or its operating system. So we can do something like this, where we say, hello, world. This minion's name is, and we'll fill that in a minute. And then we're going to say this server is running, and we'll fill that in a minute. So if we wanted to pull in some of the grain information, like the name, we can use double curly braces, and we could say grains, and then we could say, and there are a bunch of different options, and this is again where you should go through maybe in query grains.items and see what you want, but you could say ID, and if we then did grains and did OS finger, because this will give us our operating system. So we're going to pull in this dynamically and generate it on the fly. So let's save and quit. And the next thing we need to do is let's edit our state. So the way it is right now, it's going to only put hello world in there. So let's comment this out. And the way that we tell Salt to use this file is called source. And what you want to do is, depending on where the source is, that's where we're going to basically point to. So if it's coming through the Salt master, through our Salt state directories, we would want to use salt : // and then starting at the top level, so we're in the /srv/salt/world. So we're going to want to specify world/files/world.txt.jinja. And the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to specify that this is a template, and we are using Jinja to create this template. And we can leave the username, the group, and the mode the way it is, and we can use it like this. So We're no longer using contents, and we're going to now specify the file is stored somewhere else. So let's save and quit this. Okay, to apply this, we can again use the specific state.apply execution module. And this time, instead of applying the default module, we could just allow it to apply the high state. So it's going to go through the top file and find all states that apply to minion 1. All right, as we can see, I made one mistake. So let's edit the Jinja file again. And the actual name of the grain is OS finger, all one word. So let's save this. And let's run this again. So we're going to apply the top state. All right. Now we can see something, it's a little bit different. Previously, we had created the file already, and it had hello world in there. But now we can actually see a diff of what has happened during the state run. So hello world already existed, and now it's added 3 new lines. So it added this line, and a blank line. And let's hop over here. And we can see hello world, this minion's name is minion1.devopsclinic. Minion1.devopsclinic. The server is running CentOS Linux 7. Let's go ahead and make this a little more complex. So if we were to look at this, we're going to remove that. And let's say we wanted to put this file into a folder called world. And if we're to run this right now, we're going to get an error. And the error is there's no directory /root/world. And so it can't create the file. So we can also use the file module to add a folder. And this is file.directory. Now I'm adding file.directory right here. And we're going to add user permissions, group, and the mode. Now, when we run this, we're probably also going to see another error. And the error is, even though we had it defined to create the folder, it created the folder after it tried to create the file. So if we look at this server, we can see it created the folder, and here's the original file we had. Let's remove that. But under this, it didn't create the file. All right, so how can we fix this? So one way to fix this is if we were to put the create directory syntax above the create file syntax, that would be the one way, and probably the best way. Let's go ahead and move this. And if we run this, we see that it creates the directory and creates the file. But we can also use something called a require. So if we go to the file syntax and we say require, and then we indent 2 more, and we say require root world. And this is where previously I'd mentioned we would be using the syntax identifiers. So we're going to say we want to require that the directory exists first before this syntax is run. Let's save this, and let's remove so on the minion one there's no world folder or file. And if we save our state, and let's apply it again, and we can see it creates the folder and then it creates the file. And no matter how we do this, if we move the directory below there, and let's remove that again, and apply the state, we'll see that it creates a folder first because of the require statement. So this is just the beginning of configuration management with Salt. Try it out on your servers and let me know how you did. And don't forget, if you have any comments or questions, to let us know below. We would love to help you. Part 4 of getting started with Salt will be out soon. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you can be notified when it's available. And if this video was helpful, please like and share. This helps us and shows us you find our content valuable. And until next time, automate everything.